Every culture has spiritual teachers. South Park has Cartman. And sure, he's a narcissistic sociopath with a talent for ruining lives, but what if his absolute lack of empathy accidentally reveals profound truths about compassion, harmony, and the self-destruction of ego? Taoism includes key principles that focus on universal values like compassion, moderation, balance, and reducing ego guidance to achieve inner peace. Cartman heard that and chose a much different path. In all of his antics, horrifying displays of selfishness, revenge, excessiveness, he might be the greatest teacher on unchecked pride and forcefulness the world has ever seen.
Yes, it is the most genius plan ever.
This is Toonlightenment, where we learn life lessons, emotional coping skills, and accidental wisdom from cartoons. And today we're diving into the Tao of Cartman, a spiritual journey that immediately drives off a cliff. Grab your snacky cakes, let's walk the path sideways. Act 1. The Tao of Ego. Cartman is a walking contradiction. A kid so selfish he accidentally becomes a case study in why ego ruins everything. Tao teaches humility. Cartman teaches whatever the opposite of that is. If the first principle of Taoism is align yourself with the natural flow of the universe, Cartman's version of this is force the universe to do exactly what I want, or destroy it. Let's look at a few legendary examples. When things or people hurt you, Tao principles would tell you to approach it with compassion and harmony to solve the problem. Cartman's preferred way is revenge so extreme it causes atmospheric pressure changes. This is perfectly illustrated in Scott Tenorman Must Die. Cartman gets scammed by an older kid, Scott Tenorman, after bragging he got his first pubes, which he purchased. When his friends tell him the truth, he's furious and tries to get his money back. Scott refuses and keeps fooling Cartman, humiliating him publicly. Cartman responds by orchestrating a full-blown Shakespearean tragedy through a chili con carnival cook-off. Stan and Kyle, because they hate Cartman, warn Scott about the setup, proving how ego nukes friendships. Even Cartman's friends see his selfish ego as deplorable. Scott thinks he'll fool Cartman one more time, but Cartman predicts their betrayal. He switches the chili, and what Scott eats isn't beef. Cartman tricked a farmer into killing Scott's parents for trespassing, then used them to make the chili. As Scott collapses into psychological chaos and the town watches in horror, Cartman basks in warped satisfaction like a James Bond villain who finally got a catering budget. The Tao says, yield and overcome. Cartman says, overcome and then make them yield, their parents. Up until the end, Scott really is the bad guy here. No one likes a bully, but as Cartman's pride takes over and he commits the unthinkable, he becomes the ultimate metaphor. Ego that consumes everything. Friendships, morality, and yes, chili. Honestly, Cartman's ego is such a recurring theme you could throw a dart at the episode list and still hit an example. In the Coon trilogy, Cartman treats heroism like a branding opportunity, speaking in third person, demanding validation, and marketing himself like a fast food franchise. When the team rejects him, he literally becomes the villain, because if ego can't be Batman, it'll burn down Gotham and blame you for the matches. Meanwhile, Kenny as Mysterion is the quiet opposite. Selfless, grounded, carrying the burden of immortality instead of flexing it for applause. That contrast is the point. Act 1 lesson: when you're driven by ego, the world becomes your personal Hunger Games. And Cartman, he always volunteers as tribute and drags everyone else with him. Act 2, the Tao of Balance, or Cartman versus Balance. Taoism teaches yin and yang, the harmony between opposites. Cartman, meanwhile, treats balance like a personal enemy. If Taoism is about flowing with the universe, Cartman's philosophy is more like grab the universe by the throat and make it build you a theme park. Which brings us to Cartman Land, the ultimate case study in how ego breaks balance, and then gets taxed for it. Cartman inherits $1 million from his grandmother, who lovingly calls him her favorite fat little man, my perfect round pudding piler. Most people might invest, donate, or at least buy Stan a jacket. Cartman instead does the spiritually enlightened thing. He buys an entire amusement park for himself. No friends, no joy sharing, just blissful solitude and 0 lines. Pure yin, no yang, and absolutely no self-awareness. Meanwhile, Kyle spirals into existential crisis and a hemorrhoid because he believes good behavior should equal blessings, not God gives me medical misery while Cartman gets a roller coaster. Even the Tao would look at this and say, yeah, that's not balanced. Cartman's perfect isolated paradise lasts about 5 minutes. He catches Stan and Kyle trying to sneak in, so he hires security. Security costs money, so he has to let a few people in for a price. Then the rides break. He needs maintenance workers who cost money, so he lets more people in. Then concession staff, cotton candy vendors, and it keeps going. Soon Cartman Land becomes exactly what he built it to avoid. Crowds, noise, long lines, and worst of all, other humans. Taoism teaches Wu Wei, effortless action through non-forcing. Cartman discovers the hard way. When you force paradise, paradise forces back. This is Taoism's version of karma. When you try to control everything, the thing you fear most becomes your roommate. A money show profiles Cartman as a financial mastermind, the kid who created demand by telling the world, you can't come in. They turn his emotional meltdown into a business case study. He isn't a balanced leader, he's just a stubborn child with a ticket booth. But ego doesn't know the difference. Cartman runs into trouble with the IRS. Kenny dies because, well, South Park. Cartman sells the park to pay everything back and loses it all. No money, no theme park, no victory. And hilariously, this is what finally heals Kyle. Seeing Cartman suffer restores Kyle's faith in the universe. Even Kyle's hemorrhoid finds balance before Cartman does. Act 2 lesson: possession without purpose leads to isolation. When you hoard joy instead of sharing it, even ego gets lonely. Cartman chases control, balance chases him back. Act 3, the Tao of compassion, or why Cartman is all yang and no yin, where the Tao says, be gentle, be humble, be compassionate. Cartman treats those values the way he treats eating vegetables, something other people should follow, but definitely not him. And there is no better case study than Casa Bonita, because everyone needs a little Casa Bonita in their life. But only Cartman would destroy another child's life to get there. In this episode, Cartman learns he's not invited to Kyle's birthday trip. Kyle explains that Cartman isn't his friend, not because of a misunderstanding, but because Cartman constantly tears him down, mocks his identity, and treats cruelty like a hobby. This moment is actually a perfect Taoist contrast. Compassion builds relationships. Ego poisons them. Kyle chooses Butters instead because, in Kyle's own words, Butters is not a dick to me. That right there might be the purest definition of compassion in television history. 6 words, 0 ego, total clarity. Butters isn't perfect. He isn't powerful. He is just kind, and that makes him worthy. Meanwhile, Cartman hears this lesson and responds like Cartman always does. Be compassionate? Cool. I'll weaponize kindness instead. Cartman consults Jimmy, who tells him the path is simple. Just be genuinely nice. A normal human would reflect, grow, maybe experience humility. Cartman instead treats kindness like a con artist training module. He pretends to protect Kyle, acts polite in public, and performs goodness like it's a Broadway show, because Cartman doesn't want harmony, he wants access. That's not compassion, that's ego in a kindness costume. So he removes Butters from reality instead. Since manipulative kindness doesn't work, Cartman goes with plan B, eliminate the competition. Taoism weeps. He invents an elaborate apocalypse story, convinces Butters the world has ended, and traps him in a makeshift survival bunker. Butters, because he is trusting, gentle, and innocent, believes him completely. This is where the Taoist lesson becomes crystal clear. Compassion protects the vulnerable. Cartman exploits them. The Tao says, the gentle overcomes the rigid. Cartman says, the rigid locks the gentle in a bunker so I can get sopapillas. And Cartman thinks, nice, now I can go eat sopapillas. Butters is eventually found. The lie unravels, Cartman is exposed. Before he's caught by police, he sprints through Casa Bonita like a man trying to achieve spiritual enlightenment through cliff-diving pirates. When the authorities confront him and ask, was it worth it? Cartman says, yes. This is the Taoist punchline. True joy comes from connection and compassion. Cartman chases joy through obsession and selfishness, and ends up alone. Kyle may have suffered, Butters was traumatized. Cartman got what he wanted, and still gained nothing, because happiness without compassion isn't happiness. It's ego wearing a sombrero. Act 3 lesson: when compassion becomes who you are, you earn real friendships, the kind where you're actually invited to the birthday party. But Cartman, he'd rather kidnap the guest list. Final lesson: Cartman teaches us Taoism by being its opposite. He shows us exactly what not to do. Don't force outcomes. Don't chase validation through psychotic revenge. Don't let ego run your life like a raccoon-themed dictator. And definitely don't kidnap your friend for a Mexican restaurant reservation. If the Tao is the way, Cartman is the off-ramp that leads directly into oncoming traffic. But through him, we actually learn the beauty of balance, humility, and self-awareness. Cartman will never find enlightenment, but watching him crash and burn on the path, that might be the most enlightening thing of all. If you enjoyed this spiritual journey into absolute chaos, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Which Cartman moment taught you the most through being the absolute worst? Comment below with your accidental enlightenment story. And remember, in the Tao of life, be more, go with the flow, and less Cartman with a plan.